Peace and blessings, family. Hope that you are able to hear me. I'm going to just pause a minute to make sure that audio is right before I get started and that everyone can hear me clearly. This is Asar Imhotep with the Mdw-Ntr Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture out here in Philadelphia, PA. I'm just going to go to the video now to see if I can be heard. Okay, I can be heard for people who are not at the conference. And Kamal just gave me the good okay. So I will get started. Please bear with me a second. So first and foremost, would like to thank you all for allowing me to present at the conference, even though I physically can't be there. Some last minute complications dealing with school and stuff out in California. I couldn't go because I had to go there, and now I'm back here in Philadelphia. But I'm gonna now switch my screen so that I can get started. And I so wish I was there in Chicago with you all to partake in this very important conference. And so, about to share the screen here. And okay, what is going on? Of course, there will be technical difficulties when I need to do something. My PowerPoint, for some reason, seems to have frozen at the moment. Let's see if I can fix this real quick. I don't know what is going on. I'm gonna try to exit and come back. I'm on this Ubuntu system, and everything was working fine until now, of course. No, that's not what I want. Come on. Y'all give me a second here. I'm going to try on another computer. This one seems to be acting up. Please forgive me. I don't know that this particular program going to quit for split. See if I can pull it up. I'm sorry. Testing. Testing. Okay. It seems like I'm back. I don't know what is going on. I'll get this in a second. Hold on one second. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Y'all in the chat, please let me know if you can hear me. If y'all are in the chat, please let me know that you can hear me. Testing, testing. I'm back and ready. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna get back started again. Let me share. Let me make sure I got full screen when I share. Okay, bam, that's good. So, alrighty. So again, I do apologize to everyone. I don't know what went wrong with my system, but we're about to get it in now. So let me get my timer together so that don't go over time. Okay, so the title of my presentation and paper is called The Monoradical and Agglutinative Nature of Middle Egyptian. So as we know, this is a conference in which the first of many, I hope, in which we are attempting to reconstruct and revitalize the ancient Egyptian language as a living and operating language. And so the focus here is on the monoradical or monoroot nature and the agglutinative properties of Middle Egyptian. It is my understanding that we chose Middle Egyptian as the classical language in which to revitalize, you know, as our project, knowing that there's several stages and dialects and things of that nature. So this is my abstract. So this paper is concerned with the nature of Middle Egyptian word formation and its semantaxes. And a semantax is the way that a population maps its thoughts to vocabulary, the synthesis in certain types of conceptualizations and certain types of vocabulary patterns. And we'll see a little bit of that a little bit later on in our discussion. So certain assumptions about this fundamental aspect of the language, for example, how words are formed in the psychological semantic mapping between thought and lexemes, have provided a framework for scholarly research that has been unquestioned over many decades. It has been assumed that Middle Egyptian consists primarily of bi- and tri-radical roots in alignment with what we see in the Semitic languages. I will attempt to show that some of these assumptions underlying Middle Egyptian word formation may in fact be wrong, and that the underlying structure of Middle Egyptian words are in fact monosyllabic, therefore consonant, vowel, and structure, and agglutinative. This research paper demonstrates that Middle Egyptian words are formed by a consonant vowel radical with several grammatical morphemes attached to the consonant vowel root, thus giving the appearance of a bi- or tri-radical root as compared to Semitic. These false premises made by linguists may have had the effect of obscuring family resemblances, for example, between Middle Egyptian and Bantu languages. And as a result, key aspects of the language have gone unnoticed by researchers. For example, the presence of fossilized noun classes in Middle Egyptian. By reinterpreting the evidence and pointing out alternative explanations for contradictions and ambiguities, my aim is to show that, for example, Mubabinge Bilolo, who's an Egyptologist and linguist and philosopher out of Congo, his initial hunch, therefore, that Middle Egyptian is Bantu, was on point in that Bantu languages are critical in this revitalization project. The nature of how words are formed in Middle Egyptian are critical for the restoration project, but more importantly for updating the language and being able to form new words out of old roots for new technologies and social situations. So to get started, just to inform those who are not familiar with a lot of linguistic jargon that I may have used, a monosyllabic root has certain types of formations. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the primary, at least what I'm arguing here, is that Middle Egyptian and Old Egyptian is primarily made up of a monosyllabic root of the consonant vowel variety. And that's the first one you see here. So in English, an example of a consonant vowel word is go, the verb go. We also know them as vowel consonants, and in English, a vowel consonant example is the word at. You also have a variety of consonant vowel consonant, and so an example in English would be sit, and as in to sit down. And then you have the consonant vowel consonant variety, and an example that I provide here is the word fool. So you can see everywhere there's a consonant and a vowel, this is how it is formatted. So what I'm arguing is that this consonant vowel, the first one, is the essential makeup of Middle Egyptian. And not saying that you don't have bi- and tri-consonantal roots, but that they're fundamentally this form in nature. And this is something that even Budge in his dictionary has already noted in the early 1920s. And so, as I also argued in the abstract, that the Bantu languages are critical for this restoration project in terms of comparison and knowing how words are formed and how they end. And so why are Bantu languages, for example, important? Here's one reason in this process. So for those who are familiar with the topic of historical comparative linguistics, the goal of historical comparative linguistics is the reconstruction of languages and language families. So they are involved in a project with living languages for more ancestral languages in the same way that we're involved in the revitalization project with ancient Egyptian. So in that discussion, the linguist R.M. Dixon, in his text, The Rise and Fall of Languages, on page 41, he notes the following. He says that languages can be roughly classed into three types. There are isolating languages, where each meaning element makes up a distinct word. Vietnamese and Chinese. To a large extent, Yoruba in Africa is an isolating language. Agglutinative, which I mentioned earlier, where a word is likely to contain several meaning elements, but these are clearly separable. For example, Turkish and Swahili. So if you don't know, Swahili is a Bantu language. So a Bantu language is typically agglutinative. And fusional, where a word will contain several meaning elements, some of them being fused together so that a single vowel may simultaneously mark, say, tense, voice, and person, and number of subject. For example, Latin and Sanskrit. Proof of a genetic relationship rests heavily on grammatical elements, including affixes. The ideal situation is to have a proto-language that is agglutinative, and modern languages that vary from agglutinative to fusional. If a group of modern languages are basically isolating with few grammatical affixes, it may never be possible to prove genetic connection with the same degree of confidence as for an agglutinative group. So when we're doing reconstructions, the ideal situation is to have to be comparing two or more agglutinative languages, because this will confirm the way that the words are formed and the morphemes and what is fossilized and what is not fossilized. And so this becomes important as it regards ancient Egyptian. The citation I'm about to cite now is from a text called Egyptian Phonology, an introduction to the phonology of a dead language by Karsten Poist. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. And so he says, I have only discussed here the different representations of small linguistic elements, phonemes, graphemes, in spoken and written Egyptian respectively. Camerzel makes it clear that spoken Egyptian and written Egyptian can actually be considered two distinct linguistic systems, since they show marked differences on the levels of linguistic description, including morphology, syntax, and pragmatics. It is a striking fact that spoken Egyptian was a highly inflectional language, whereas written Egyptian can be described as basically agglutinative. So when we're talking about the Egyptian written system, it is agglutinative, and it's ideal to compare Middle Egyptian, for example, and Bantu, because they're both agglutinative languages. These are typological features. Now, I differ with this author here. When he says the spoken Egyptian, he's talking about Coptic. And for reasons that are beyond the scope of this presentation, I, along with a few other linguists, believe that Coptic is a totally different language, although related to Middle Egyptian. It is not the evolutionary end to Middle Egyptian. And so, again, that's a different topic, but this would also explain why the spoken language Coptic is inflectional, while Middle Egyptian primarily is agglutinative. And so to show the value of Bantu, for example, just a quick example, this is a text called The Historical Reconstruction of Great Lakes Bantu Cultural Vocabulary, Etymologies and Distributions by David Lee Schoenbrunn. On pages 193 and 195, he has these reconstructions for Great Lakes Bantu on what you see on my right-hand side, or your right-hand side of this table here. And what I done here is matched up these reconstructions to what I deem the ancient Egyptian equivalents on the left. So if you see me say Chicam or Chibantu, Chibantu is Bantu, modern Bantu languages, and Chicam is ancient Egyptian, primarily Middle Egyptian. And so as we can see here at the top, we have what we normally pronounce as unk, to swear. Chibantu informs us that at least in that variety of the language, they pronounce it hanga, promise, vowel. And to the right hand side, you can see my sound correspondences. So when we're comparing, we want to make sure that all the consonants match the consonants and vowels the vowels, but Egyptian doesn't write out their vowels, so we don't know what their vowels are. So but we can compare the consonants, as we can see through all these comparisons, what we transliterate as lowercase a matches the H here in Bantu. The N in Egyptian matches the N in Chibantu. The H, or transliterated as lowercase x, corresponds to G, and sometimes just NG by itself, but that's beyond the scope of this. But here we can see, for example, to swear an oath, unk, hanga, a promise or vow. Unk, captive, literally bound one. And and this lane here is the Wartabush or Vigus sources where you can find these terms. So I'm showing you where the source is for these definitions in Egyptian. And so so hanga, again, tie up or fix into. And so binding and belt is another variation in terms of semantics for the word unk, which would tie in with hanga here. We have anku or ankwa, stars. And in Chibantu is hanga, shine intensely of the sun. There's a text that I'm working on which will demonstrate that words for sun are actually words for to shine. What's unique here is this, on the unkwa is the W here, which is a grammatical suffix which nominalizes verbs. So this, some will say that this is a masculine W at the end, and it's not. It's just a grammatical suffix that nominalizes verbs. And so from unk, to shine or fire or whatnot, comes the noun stars. And the same thing with this suffix T here. From the same concept of shining comes when we put this grammatical T suffix, it becomes the word for fire in Egyptian. And so we have in Egyptian with the prefix, the causative prefix on this root unk, create, sculpt, and then hanga, again, sculpt in the Great Lakes Bantu. We have anku, sustenance, victuals, and then we have anku again with this nominalizing suffix, billy goat, small cattle. And the verb still exists amongst these Great Lakes Bantu as to dedicate live beasts to spirit. So the root is to give. There's also an unk for like sacrifices and stuff like this, but it's to like give and give life. But it's sustenance in this sense. And so, you know, Bantu helps us to kind of put together possible pronunciations, you know, for a lot of Egyptian words. And so I move quickly to some evidence for the monoradical terms. And so if you can see this clearly, I have bolded what I argue are the monoradical roots, which for those, of course, who are familiar with the writing, we would transliterate this as a capital D. Again, this is a suffix here for that nominalizes or gives a secondary nominal meaning to nouns. So it nominalizes and gives secondary meanings to nouns in terms of this T, which people mistake as a feminine T on certain words. And so we can see, just going from left to right, the building of these monoradicals or these attachments or these agglutinative features to this monoradical root. And so in this first column here, we have the jet, body, self, the jet, serf, which is a worker. And then we have WN and then WT as a suffix over here, and it's a word meaning people. So we have the plural, still the nominative suffix t and the prefix of agent, which is the n. In the second column, we have rigi, to give, to set, to place. But that nominalizing t turns the root into gift. And then with more roots here, excuse me, with more grammatical morphemes here, we have the word for offerings. And we can see, I won't go through all of them, that it goes through the same process. And so you see that one monoradical root, and then with the additions of prefixes and suffixes, you get different types of words. And so this is going to be important if we're going to be able to understand, first and foremost, how words are formatted in Egyptian, and then how we can make new words understanding these grammatical forms. So these aren't different words. These are the same root with different prefixes and suffixes to the roots. And they give us slightly semantic shades in terms of meaning. So with this slide here, you know, all of this is being recorded. So, you know, you can come back and pause this and compare for yourself. But the lowercase d, excuse me, the capital D and the lowercase x in Egyptian interchange. And so we got to be mindful of dialects in Middle Egyptian. Most texts that you read will say that they don't know about the dialects of Middle Egyptian, but they haven't really paid attention. The dialects are clear in terms of Middle and Old Egyptian. And so, and they may just totally be different languages, all using the same script. And so if you can view, I'll just go the first two rows here. And so, you know, dejet, body, self, serf. Indiget, subject, slave. Sajim, servant. All different varieties on that same j root. That j corresponds to kh in Egyptian, and it with certain prefixes, it becomes the living person, captive, bound one, as we saw before. And we see the same thing with the word for viper or snake. And so we can see in these languages here that that this is matter of fact the case. And I'll give some more proof a little later. And so another feature of the language is that, and I'm gonna kind of switch gears here quickly, is that the script, the consonant clusters that we observe apply not only to the hieroglyph itself, but different features of the hieroglyph. And so I get this example here, or this citation, Prophets, Lovers, and Giraffes, World Classification in Ancient Egyptian by Dr. Orly Goldwasser. She's a linguist and Egyptologist out of Europe. And she's done a lot in terms of writing about the class nature of the ancient Egyptian writing script. So when you're talking about determinatives, the more proper term is a class or a classifier. So this text focuses on the classifier nature of ancient Egyptian. And so what she says in this text here, for example, she says that Egyptian categories as they emerge from the script are not always strictly taxonomic, but show complex knowledge organization categories or domains in which the classifier may stand taxonomic and schematic relations to the classified meanings of the words. For example, the hieroglyph here, per, for house, may be activated as the classifier for habitat, or the like in the words bechin, fort, fortress, yistum, ehiwu, stable, arim, tent. However, it may also appear as a classifier in words such as ariet, gate, hat, chamber, which denote a kind of house, which denote not a kind of house, but a certain part of the house. And so I'll stop there and go to the footnote for that section. And so she says that the hierarchies of parts of forms, hierarchies of parts, of parts form partsonymies. A familiar one is the body part partonymy, where body is divided into head, trunk, arms, legs, and each of these is in turn divided into subparts. In the hieroglyphic script, partonymy can be traced in cases such as house, room, window, and bed. So when you see this classifier here, it's not only for the habitat, but for the walls and for the door and for the window. All of this has words for per in it in the language, and they all refer to this. They all utilize this in a very efficient way. And so, again, the Bantu languages help us in this regard. So, for example, the Y5 Gardner sign glyph min actually is several different words. So we have this feature here. This is the hieroglyph. And so there's the base, there's the pointy parts of it out like this, and there's the gap in between. All of these words that represent these concepts for this one glyph, but the different partonymies are given by an MN root. And we can see the same thing here in the Bantu languages. So for example, if we want to talk about the erect part right here, we have imani, imanika. This is in Chiluba Bantu. Dimani, remain standing in a fixed position, stable. So we know that the word min also means established, stable. And so we find the cognates in Chiluba in that same way. And so for sake of time, I'm going to keep forward. And so Chiluba also, informs us, for example, like with the word mana, toes. Just like when you look at your toes, the toes are that aspect that stick out from a base. And so same thing with menu, teeth, menu or munu, fingers. They all have the same feature, which you see here in this one hieroglyph. But even the gap between, like this word here, mwani or mwanya, gap between teeth. So the space in between the top of the hieroglyph also has an MN root. And lumona, dark sting. And so with the same thing, because we know that the word min in Egyptian means to hold up, to stand up, and we can see it in these words at the bottom of the screen here. Minti, mass, support. Remini, shoulder, carry, support, match, equal. Bearer, supporter. And so we see in Chiluba here related words with that same type of meaning, which you can see here. And so knowing Bantu and knowing Chiluba, these actually are monosyllabic roots with grammatical morphemes attached to it, just like what we see in ancient Egyptian. And so it's very telling. And so I'm going to keep going. There's a concept called semantics that I mentioned earlier. So, for example, the word unk, meaning earth and land, there's also a variation meaning unk, living person, inhabitant, member of a group, or soldier. In Proto-Bantu, we have the same root. And so when you say chi in Proto-Bantu, we have ground, country, underneath. And so we see cognates in languages like Mende, Indo, earth, Kikamba, Inthi, floor, ground, land, country, and Kiswahili, Inchi, country. And that same chi is a word for inhabitant or person of. So there's a semantic mapping between the earth and the land and the person. They're one and the same thing, probably due to paronymy. But we can see that semantics in Egyptian, and we see the same semantics in Bantu. And so last but not least, how do we form new words from old roots? And I won't go through this again. I'm going to keep it up so when you come back and review this, you can, judge for yourself. But I wanted to show here that there is a feminine T in Egyptian. However, not every T suffix is a feminine T. It is a grammatical nominalizer. And we can see the same feature in the Collagen language, which is a Nilo-Saharan language, in Sudan, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Kenya, with the same cognates in Egyptian. So, for example, we'll take the word large in Egyptian on the left. We can see largeness, the secondary noun, with the T suffix. In Collagen, is u or wu. And then they say u into or u indu, largeness. And so the T and the D suffixes, or the T and D sounds interchange in Collagen. And the same thing in Egyptian. And so when we say bin, bad or evil, as an adjective, we also have binet, evil, as a noun in Egyptian. We have the same thing, bunyin, enemy, and Boon-Ute and enemy in collagen. So they have Boon witching and then Boon-Dit and evil, the evil, or the witchcraft. And so we see the same grammatical feature in collagen that we do in Egyptian. So it gives us some insight on how to formulate words or how to formulate nouns from verbs. So for example, if we wanted to say or bring Egyptian up to date with trying to find a word for a computer, the word computer means to calculate or to count or to sum up from compute. And so in linguistics, there's a phenomenon called a calc. That's when we take a root for root loan translation. That means we, instead of borrowing the word, we understand what the word means in the native language, and we just find native words that match the root semantically in the other language. So what if we wanted to build a word for a computer, we have several options. So we have haseb, to count, to reckon, to calculate, but that is a verb. So how do we nominalize it? We put a T suffix at the end of it. Hasebet, computer. Or we could say hasebu, a computer, in terms of a human agent, because the W at the end of a word also nominalizes it a root, but in terms of a human agent, so to speak. So a human computer, a calculator. And so we have ip, to calculate, to reckon. Ipet would be a word for a computer. And then, you know, nis, to calculate, to reckon. Niset, computer. And so this is how we would, you know, update the language, knowing how to form words and where the grammatical features, you know, begin and end. And actually, these first two examples are dialectical variants of each other. The P in this variant and the B in this variant, these are two different dialects or languages in ancient Egyptian who have contributed to the script. And so they just add different prefixes, you know, to that root. And so there's an interchange in Egyptian between B, the voice bilabial plosive, and the P, the voiceless bilabial plosive. And so with that, I end my presentation, and I hope that the technical difficulties wasn't too bad. About to go back into the thing here and stop the sharing of my screen. And so I thank you all for listening. I don't know if you are doing question and answer. I'm going to the chat room. I don't see any questions. And so again, I'll just end there. I thank you all. If y'all have any questions, just, you know, hit me up. Either Facebook or email me, visit the website. And so I hope y'all having a good time out there. Thank you, Brother Kamau. I probably went over time. I do apologize. So thank you all, and God bless you. Good night. Hotep.